One cold, windy evening, a hungry crowd stood outside Madam Chopfinger's restaurant and bar. Their noses flared as the thick, tantalizing aroma of roasted meat and spicy pepper soup filled the air, dancing around them like an invincible rope pulling them closer. The scent was so powerful that some stomachs growled loudly, causing embarrassed laughter among the waiting customers. It was like magic, the way the aroma wrapped around their senses, making their mouth water uncontrollably. The queue stretched long, curving around the corner as people pushed each other just to get closer. Nobody wanted to miss a taste of her famous grilled meat, garnished with flavorful pepper and onions that shimmered with oil under the flickering street lights. The roasted meat looked so succulent, dripping with juice that sizzled as it hit the hot coals. And the pepper soup? Oh, the pepper soup! Its rich, spicy scent could make a fasting monk break his fast. It was said to be the best in town, better than anything any other food seller could prepare. Madam Chopfinger's restaurant was the talk of the town. People traveled from distant cities just to eat at her place. Some rich men and politicians would park their flashy cars by the roadside and join the queue, not minding their status. Big market traders who usually had no time for anything else would close their shops early just to grab a plate. Mothers would wake up before dawn, rushing to buy her food as school lunch for their children. Men abandoned their wives' cooking at home, forming excuses just to eat at Madam Chopfinger's restaurant. Today, the crowd was restless, their eyes fixed on the door. A young man at the front of the line complained, "Why hasn't she opened yet? I have been here since before the cock crowed." His voice was filled with impatience, but no one blamed him. The wait was torture, with the delicious scent teasing their noses. Suddenly, the door creaked open, and Madam Chopfingers appeared. She was a tall, chubby woman with piercing eyes that seemed to look right through people. Her face held no smile, just a cold expression that made her look like she was always in deep thoughts. "Please, everyone should queue well. I will not sell to anyone if the line is scattered," she commanded in a sharp voice. The crowd immediately straightened up, no one wanting to offend her and lose their chance to eat her food. Inside the restaurant, strange things were happening. Behind the closed kitchen doors, pots clanged and ladles stirred in boiling soups, but no one was there. The fire under the grills burned fiercely, roasting meats that turned golden brown, dripping juices into the flames with loud hisses. Invisible hands moved around, mixing spices, seasoning meats, and planting them neatly. It was as if spirits were cooking. Madam Chopfinger stood at the doorway, her eyes glowing with a strange light as she watched the unseen beings walk. She never cooked alone, even though nobody ever saw anyone helping her. In the dead of the night, when the world was asleep, she would sneak out to meet her secret suppliers, the mogul attendants who sold her the freshest parts. With each delivery, they whispered in hushed voices, their eyes darting nervously around. "Madam, this is the best one. It's still very fresh," one of them would say, handing over a blood-stained sack and a gallon of water used in bathing the dead. She would smile, a cold, wicked smile that could freeze water, and drop a thick envelope of cash in their hands. They never asked questions, and neither did she. She never tasted her own food, not even a single bite. Instead, she ate only fruit and bought food from other vendors, but nobody ever wondered why. Perhaps it was because her meals were laced with powerful charms that clouded their minds, making them crave her food endlessly without questions. Outside, the crowd grew restless again. The door swung open and Madam Chopfingers began serving. Plate after plate, she dished out steaming pepper soup, grilled meat glistening with oil, and roasted meat garnished with onions and pepper. The crowd devoured the food greedily, their faces lighting up with satisfaction. But nobody knew the dark secret behind the delicious taste. Nobody knew the truth about Madam Chop Fingers. Not yet. As the crowd devoured the meat, moans of satisfaction filled the air. "This pepper soup is everything," a man exclaimed, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "No other place can cook like this." His friend nodded, chewing loudly on a piece of grilled meat. "Look at the way it melts into the mouth. What kind of meat is this?" He wondered, but the question quickly vanished from his mind as he took another bite. Unknown to them that the meat they enjoyed so well wasn't from any animal. It was from the freshest human parts, carefully selected and prepared in the dead of the night. And the water that gave her pepper soup its rich, irresistible taste? It came from the morgue, the same water used to wash corpses before they were buried. But how did Madam Chop Fingers become this evil? How did she learn such a dark and deadly recipe? Many years ago, she was known as Adako, a beautiful woman with a bright future. She was born in the same village where she now ran her restaurant. But back then, her life was full of sorrow and pain. Her mother died while giving birth to her, and her father passed away mysteriously when she was only 5. Some said he was poisoned, others whispered he died of a broken heart. Either way, Adaku was left alone, an orphan with no one to care for her. The villagers believed she was cursed. Bad luck follows that one like shadow, they would say, crossing to the other side of the road whenever she walked by. Even the children avoided her, calling her names and throwing stones. She grew up lonely, isolated and hated. But the worst pain came when she got married. She fell in love with Chidi, a hard-working farmer who didn't care about the rumors surrounding her. They lived happily for a while, but tragedy struck again. One by one, their children died mysteriously, never surviving past their first year. It was as if death had made her its favorite companion. When her husband Chidi also died suddenly, the villagers became convinced that she was cursed. "She is the cause. Everyone around her dies," they shouted. They accused her of being a witch, claiming she had sacrificed her own family to evil spirits. In their anger and fear, they banished her from the village, chasing her out with sticks and stones. "Don't ever come back," they warned, throwing her belongings at her as she walked away in tears. She wandered through the thick forest, crying and cursing her fate. "Why me? What did I do to deserve this?" she sobbed, her voice echoing in the emptiness. As night fell, the forest grew cold and dark. Strange sounds echoed from the shadows, old hoots, rustling leaves, and the hosts of wild animals. Adaku shivered, hugging herself as she sat on a fallen log. Her eyes swollen from crying, her stomach rumbled, but there was no food, no shelter, no hope. Just when she thought she would die in that forest, an old woman appeared before her. The woman's hair was white as snow, her face wrinkled like dried leaves, and her eyes glowed with a strange otherworldly light. She wore tattered clothes and her feet didn't touch the ground. "Why do you cry, child?" the old woman asked, her voice hollow and echoing. Adaku jumped back, her fear tightening her throat. Who are you?" she stammered. The old woman smiled, revealing sharp yellow teeth. "I am someone who can end your pain if you want me to." Her words were soft but heavy, carrying a promise of something dark and powerful. Adaku's eyes widened. "End my pain? How?" The old woman leaned closer, her eyes burning like fire. "Those who wronged you, would you like to make them suffer? Would you like to take revenge on all who caused you pain?" Revenge? The word echoed in Adaku's mind, filling her heart with anger and bitterness. She remembered the faces of the villagers, the ones who mocked her, the ones who accused her, the ones who threw stones and banished her. "Yes," she whispered, her fists tightening. "I want them to suffer. I want them to feel my pain." The old woman's smile grew wider. "Then follow me." She led Adaku to a riverside deep in the forest. The water was dark and still, reflecting the crescent moon like a silver blade. There, at the edge of the water, stood 3 tall figures, their faces hidden under black hoods. They chanted softly, their voices blending with the wind, sending chills down Adaku's spine. The old woman gestured Adaku to step forward. "Kneel," she commanded, her voice echoing across the water. Adaku obeyed, her heart pounding as cold moans seeped into her knees. One of the hooded figures stepped forward, holding a clay pot filled with a thick, dark liquid. He poured it over Adaku's head, and she felt a burning sensation as it ran down her face, soaking her hair and clothes. She wanted to scream, but her voice was gone. "From this day on, you shall no longer be Adaku," the old woman chanted. "You shall be reborn with power, strength, and vengeance. You shall be known as Madam Chop Fingers." As the word echoed in the night, the water in the river began to bubble, and a thick fog rose, swirling around them. The hooded figures continued chanting, their voices rising and falling like a haunting melody. Adaku felt herself changing, her body growing cold and heavy. Her vision blurred and she collapsed, sinking into the mud as darkness swallowed her. When she woke up, she was no longer the same. Her face had changed, her voice was different, and her heart was cold, void of love or mercy. She was no longer Adaku, the cursed widow. She was Madam Chop Fingers, the woman who would make the villagers pay for all they had done to her. With her new identity and supernatural powers, she returned to the village. Nobody recognized her. Nobody knew she was the same woman they had banished. She set up her restaurant and began cooking with her deadly secret recipe, using human parts and water from the dead. One by one, she drove other food sellers out of business. Madam Chop Fingers' restaurants became the most popular spot in the village and beyond. From dawn to dusk, people trooped in, drawn by the irresistible aroma that floated through the air, wrapping around them like an invisible hand pulling them in. She stood behind her counter, her face masked with a warm, welcoming smile, serving plates of steamed pepper soup, spicy grilled meat, and jollof rice. Her fingers moved swiftly, dishing out meals with practiced ease. Yet nobody ever saw her taste even a morsel. She never licked her fingers or sampled her cooking. She only ate fruits, nibbling quietly at the corner of her shop, her eyes watching her customers like a predator studying its prey. "Madam Chop Fingers, please add extra meat," a young man shouted, waving his money in the air. He was a regular, Nnamdi, the son of a wealthy merchant. His love for her roasted meat was almost an obsession. "Your meat is too delicious, Madam Chop Fingers," he always joked, his laughter echoing across the room. Madam Chop Fingers' smile widened as she piled more roasted meat on his plate. "Eat well, my son. Eat and grow strong," she said, her voice honeyed and soft. But behind her words was a dark truth, a curse that followed every bite. At first, Madam Chop Fingers' food seemed like a blessing, irresistibly delicious, filling, and addictive. But those who ate it for a long time began to experience strange, unexplainable misfortunes. It didn't happen all at once. The effect crept in slowly, like a silent curse wrapping its fingers around their lives. Nnamdi was the first to experience it. He woke up one night drenched in sweat, his heart pounding wildly. In his dream, he had been running through the forest, chased by something he couldn't see. It was fast, its footsteps heavy and loud, snapping branches and rustling leaves. No matter how fast he ran, it got closer, its hot breath brushing his neck. Just as it grabbed him, he woke up screaming, his body shaking with fear. The next day, he laughed it off. "It's just a nightmare," he told his friends. But his eyes were sunken, his face pale. He tried to forget it, but the dreams continued, getting worse each night. He stopped sleeping, afraid of the dark forest and the creatures that chased him. But the nightmare were only the beginning. A week later, Nnamdi began to lose weight. His once muscular frame became thin and frail, his cheek hollow, his body wasted away, his skin clinging to his bones. People noticed his condition and whispered among themselves. It's like Nnamdi had caught a disease, they said, shaking their heads in pity. See how dry he looks. His parents took him to the best hospitals, but the doctors were baffled. There is nothing wrong with him, they said, scratching their heads. He is perfectly healthy, yet he's wasting away. They prescribed vitamins, supplements, and special diets, but nothing worked. His health continued to deteriorate. One evening, Nnamdi collapsed, but by the time they carried him to the hospital, he was dead. Nnamdi's death shook the whole village, but it didn't stop people from eating at Madam Chopfinger's restaurant. Her food was too delicious, too addictive. The more they ate, the more they craved it. It was as if her food had cast a spell on them. One by one, more people began to fall ill. Madam Chopfingers watched it all, her face expressionless, her eyes cold and unfeeling. She knew exactly what was happening to them. Her supernatural powers allowed her to see everything, even their dreams. The nightmares, the cravings, the illness, they were all part of the curse that came with eating her food. It was her revenge, her way of making the villagers suffer for what they did to her. She took pleasure in their misery, her heart hardened by years of pain and rejection. But she wasn't done yet. Her vengeance was just beginning, and she would not stop until they all paid their price. Madam Chopfinger's business continued to boom. People were addicted to her food, unable to stop even as they watched their loved ones suffer. She stood behind her counter, serving them with a smile, her eyes gleaming with wicked satisfaction. But her reign of terror was about to end. Among the food vendors she sent out of business was Cecilia, a woman known for her spiritual gifts. She was the only one who could see beyond Madam Chopfinger's charms. From the first day she tasted her food, she sensed something evil, a darkness that clung to every bite. She stopped eating there and warned others, but nobody listened. Determined to find out the truth, Cecilia began to follow Madam Chopfingers secretly. One night, she saw her sneaking out, her body moving unnaturally fast, her feet barely touching the ground. She followed her to the morgue, watching in horror as Madam Chopfinger exchanged money with the attendants and walked out carrying bags of meat and a container of murky water. Cecilia's heart raced as she pieced it together. The meat were human parts and the water was from dead bodies. Her stomach churned, bile rising in her throat as she realized the villagers were eating human flesh. She knew she had to act fast before more lives were ruined. The next morning, she confronted the village elders, telling them everything she saw. The mob of angry men stormed her restaurant, breaking down the doors to her secret store. The sight that greeted them left them speechless. In the large fridge were human parts of all kinds, arms, legs, heads, arranged like regular meat. There were bones, eyes floating in jars, and containers filled with dark water from the morgue. The air was heavy with the stench of death, causing some men to vomit on the spot. The villagers were traumatized, their stomachs churning with the horrifying realization of what they had eaten. People screamed, fainted, and others clawed at their throats, trying to vomit out the cursed food. But it was too late. Madam Chopfingers was dragged out and beaten mercilessly. Blood streamed down her face as she confessed everything, revealing her true identity as Adako, the banished widow. Her body shimmered, her supernatural disguise fading away, revealing her old face twisted with malice and revenge. Before the villagers could burn her alive, the police intervened, arresting her and taking her away. Her restaurant was destroyed, the cursed food burned to ashes, and the spell over the villagers was finally broken. One by one, those affected began to recover. Madam Chopfinger's quest for wealth and revenge consumed her soul, leading her down a dark path that ultimately destroyed her. Be cautious of what you consume. Not all food is just food. It is wise to know the source and the person behind it, for not everyone who serves you has good intentions.